In the vast tapestry of ancient Greek mythology, there exist stories that time has gently obscured, not erased, but softened like ancient frescoes fading on temple walls. These are the myths that slip between the cracks of popular retellings, the tales overshadowed by the thunderous exploits of Zeus, the cunning of Odysseus, or the strength of Heracles. Yet within these forgotten narratives lies a particular kind of magic, the kind that whispers rather than shouts, that invites contemplation rather than demands attention. Tonight, we journey together into these hidden chambers of the ancient world, where giants dared to challenge the heavens by stacking mountains, where humble couples were rewarded with immortality for simple kindness, and where love transcended the boundaries between mortal and divine. These stories have waited patiently in the shadows, preserved in fragmentary texts, scattered references, and oral traditions that survived despite centuries of neglect. The ancient Greeks understood something profound about storytelling, that not every tale needed to be a grand epic filled with battles and conquests. Some myths served as gentle parables, intimate character studies, or quiet meditations on human nature and the divine order of the cosmos. These lesser-known stories often reveal more about the Greek understanding of virtue, fate, and the relationship between gods and mortals than their more famous counterparts. Consider for a moment why certain myths become famous while others fade. The Odyssey captivates with its adventure and scope, yet a story like that of Baucis and Philemon, two elderly peasants who showed kindness to disguised gods, might teach us more about the values that mattered to everyday Greeks than the exploits of warrior kings ever could. The tragedy of Ajax, one of the greatest heroes of the Trojan War, has been overshadowed by Achilles and Odysseus. Yet his story speaks to the devastating consequences of wounded pride and perceived injustice in ways that remain startlingly relevant. These lost myths share certain qualities that make them particularly suited for quiet reflection. They tend to focus on individual character rather than sweeping historical events. They explore the inner landscapes of emotion, love, jealousy, pride, grief, transformation, with a delicacy that invites us to see ourselves in these ancient figures. They remind us that mythology was never merely entertainment, but served as a mirror held up to the human condition, reflecting both our nobility and our flaws. As we move through this collection, allow yourself to sink into the rhythm of these ancient stories. Let the peaceful cadence of forgotten tales wash over you like gentle waves upon an ancient shore. There is no urgency here, no race to reach a climax or conclusion. These myths have waited millennia to be heard again. They can wait a few more moments for us to truly listen. The structure of our journey tonight moves through various themes and tones, from the cosmic ambition of giants to the intimate devotion of elderly lovers, from the madness of wounded heroes to the transformation of nymphs and mortals into eternal symbols. Each story stands alone, yet together they weave a larger understanding of what the Greeks believed about fate, divine justice, the power of love, and the consequences of pride. In our modern world of constant stimulation and noise, these quiet myths offer something increasingly rare: space for contemplation, permission to slow down, an invitation to let stories unfold at their own pace rather than rushing toward resolution. The ancient Greeks told these stories by firelight, in the cool evening hours when the day's work was done and the mind could wander into the realm of gods and heroes, nymphs and monsters, transformation and eternal truth. So settle yourself comfortably, release the tensions of the day, and prepare to enter a world where the forgotten speaks with surprising clarity, where the overlooked reveals unexpected depth, and where myths that time has softened continue to offer wisdom, wonder, and the peculiar comfort of knowing that human struggles, loves, and transformations have echoed across the centuries, connecting us to those who told and heard these very same stories thousands of years ago. Among the many monstrous beings born from the primordial elements of Greek mythology, few capture the imagination quite like the Alloadi, twin giants whose ambition exceeded even their tremendous physical stature. Their names were Otus and Ephialtes, sons of Poseidon and Iphimedia, though they were sometimes called the sons of Aloeus, the mortal man who married their mother. This ambiguity of parentage is itself revealing, suggesting the liminal space these beings occupied between the mortal and divine realms. The Alloadae were not merely large, they embodied an impossible scale that defied natural order. Ancient texts describe how these twin brothers grew at an astonishing rate, 9 fingers in width and 9 fathoms in height every year from their birth. By the time they reached the age of 9 years old, they had attained dimensions that made them a genuine threat to the established order of the cosmos. Imagine, if you will, beings so massive that mountains became tools, so powerful that the gods themselves took notice with mounting concern. But size alone does not make a myth memorable. What elevates the story of the Alloadae to tragic grandeur is their overwhelming ambition, their audacious plan that would make even the most hubristic mortal seem modest by comparison. The twin giants decided that Olympus, the sacred mountain home of the gods, should be theirs. Not content to challenge the gods through conventional warfare, they conceived of a plan both literal and symbolic in its boldness. They would storm heaven by building a stairway from the earth to the divine realm. Their method has become one of the most striking images in all of mythology. The Alloadae began to pile mountains one atop another, stacking Ossa upon Olympus, then adding Pelion to the summit, creating a pathway that would allow them to ascend from the mortal realm to challenge Zeus himself upon his throne. Picture these towering figures, their strength so immense that they could uproot entire mountains, their determination so complete that they persisted in this impossible task day after day, slowly building their stairway to heaven. The symbolism here runs deep. The act of stacking mountains represents more than physical rebellion. It embodies the human impulse to transcend limitations, to reach beyond one's station, to challenge the fundamental order of existence. The Greeks had a specific word for this kind of overreaching ambition: hubris. Yet in the case of the Alloadae, their hubris was so grand, so architecturally ambitious, that it takes on an almost sympathetic quality. Who among us has not wanted to reshape the world according to our vision, to build something impossible, to reach for heights we know we cannot attain? But the ambitions of the Alloadae extended beyond merely reaching Olympus. According to some accounts, they had designs upon the goddesses themselves. Otus declared his intention to make Artemis his bride, while Ephialtes set his sights upon Hera, the queen of the gods and wife of Zeus. This addition to their plan reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of the divine order. They saw the goddesses as prizes to be claimed, rather than as powerful beings in their own right, a mistake that would contribute to their downfall. The gods, naturally, could not permit such an affront to cosmic order to continue. Yet the Alloadae had grown so powerful that direct confrontation would have been costly. The twins had even succeeded in one of their earlier exploits. They had captured Ares, the god of war himself, and imprisoned him in a bronze jar for 13 months. Only through the intervention of Hermes was Ares finally freed, nearly dead from his confinement. If the Alauadae could imprison the god of war, how could they be stopped? The answer, as so often in Greek mythology, came through cunning rather than force. Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt whom Otis sought to claim, devised a clever stratagem. She transformed herself into a magnificent white deer and appeared between the two giants as they hunted. The creature was so beautiful, so tantalizing, that both brothers immediately sought to claim it, reaching for their spears simultaneously. In their eagerness and competition with one another, tragedy struck. As the deer form of Artemis darted between them with divine speed, both giants hurled their spears at the same instant. But the goddess vanished at the crucial moment, and the weapons, thrown with the tremendous force of giant strength, found targets after all. Each brother's spear pierced the other. Otis and Ephialtes, the mighty Alauadae who had dared to storm heaven itself, fell dead by each other's hands, victims of their own ambition and sibling rivalry. Yet their story does not end with death. The Greeks believed that those who committed certain transgressions against the gods faced eternal punishment in the underworld, and the Alauadae were no exception. In Tartarus, the deepest region of the underworld, they were bound to a pillar with chains made of living serpents. A screech owl sits perched between them, its harsh cries a constant reminder of their failed ambition. This punishment, like many in Greek mythology, carries symbolic weight, bound together in death as they were united in their hubris during life, forever separated by the pillar between them, unable to communicate or conspire, accompanied only by the mournful sounds of the owl. Some versions of the myth add another layer to their punishment. The Alauadae are described as being bound back to the pillar, unable to see one another, forever aware of the other's presence, but unable to make contact. This eternal proximity without connection serves as a perfect punishment for siblings whose competitive nature contributed to their mutual destruction. They are together yet separate, bound by the consequences of their shared ambition. The legacy of the Alauadae in Greek thought is complex. On one level, their story serves as a clear warning against hubris, the dangerous pride that leads mortals or semi-divine beings to challenge the established order of the cosmos. The Greeks believed deeply in the concept of knowing one's place, of accepting the boundaries that separated mortal from immortal, earth from heaven. To transgress these boundaries was to invite destruction, as the Alauadae discovered. Yet there is something almost admirable in their audacity, a quality that later writers and thinkers have occasionally celebrated. The image of stacking mountains to reach heaven captures the human drive toward the impossible, the refusal to accept limitations, the desire to reshape reality according to one's will. In this sense, the Alauadae represent not just cautionary figures, but also symbols of human aspiration, even if that aspiration is ultimately doomed. The myth also speaks to the theme of brotherhood and rivalry, the complex dynamics between siblings who share tremendous gifts yet compete for supremacy. The Alauadae were equals in strength, matched in ambition, and united in purpose, yet this very equality became their vulnerability. Had they been less focused on competing with one another for Artemis's attention, they might have seen the trap being laid for them. Their brotherhood was simultaneously their greatest strength and their fatal weakness. In the quiet hours of night, when we reflect upon this ancient tale, we might see in the Alawade a mirror of our own ambitious projects, our tendency to reach beyond reasonable limits, our competitive instincts that sometimes blind us to danger. The mountains we stack may not be literal, but we all build towers of one kind or another: careers, relationships, creative works, personal ambitions, hoping to reach some Olympian height where we imagine fulfillment awaits. The myth asks us to consider: what mountains are we stacking? What heights are we attempting to reach? And are we building these structures in cooperation or competition with those closest to us? The Aloide's fate reminds us that the greatest obstacles to our ambitions may not be external opposition, but our own internal conflicts, our rivalries with those who share our goals, our inability to see the traps we lay for ourselves. As the echoes of this ancient story fade into contemplative silence, we carry forward the image of those twin giants, frozen forever in their punishment. A reminder that some boundaries exist not to frustrate us, but to maintain the delicate balance between ambition and wisdom, between reaching upward and knowing when to accept our place in the larger order of things. In the hills of ancient Phrygia, where the landscape rolled in gentle waves of earth and vegetation, there existed a small village whose inhabitants had grown wealthy but not wise, comfortable but not kind. This is the setting for one of Greek mythology's most tender and unusual stories, a tale that stands in stark contrast to the violence, transformation, and punishment that characterize so many ancient myths. The story of Baucis and Philemon speaks to the power of hospitality, the virtue of kindness, and the possibility that love might transcend even the boundary between life and death. Zeus, the king of the gods, had developed a habit that would be his downfall in many tales. He liked to visit the mortal realm in disguise, testing the character of humanity without the complicating factor of divine recognition. On this particular journey, he took with him his son Hermes, the messenger god, and together they assumed the forms of weary travelers, dusty from the road, dressed in simple clothes that betrayed no hint of divinity. They approached the prosperous village as evening fell, seeking shelter and sustenance as any travelers might. Door after door was closed to them. House after house turned them away. The villagers, secure in their comfort, saw only two more beggars, two more mouths requesting food they had not earned, two more bodies seeking shelter they had not paid for. The gods walked the streets of that village and found not one home willing to extend the basic courtesy that ancient custom demanded, that travelers be treated as potential guests sent by the gods themselves. How ironic, how tragically fitting, that this very custom existed precisely because of incidents like this one, yet had been forgotten by those who most needed to remember it. At the very edge of the village, where prosperity gave way to simplicity, where grand houses yielded to humble cottages, stood a dwelling of remarkable modesty. Its roof was thatched with reeds and straw, its walls built of wattle and clay. Here lived Baucis and Philemon, a couple who had grown old together, who had shared decades of marriage in this simple home, who possessed little of material wealth, but everything of moral worth. When Zeus and Hermes knocked upon their door, these elderly hosts welcomed them without hesitation. Baucis immediately began preparing what food they had, simple fare, nothing grand, but offered with genuine warmth. Philemon hurried to bring water for their guests to wash the dust from their feet, apologizing for the humbleness of their home, offering the best they had without reservation or reluctance. They moved with the practiced coordination of those who have spent a lifetime together, each anticipating the other's movements, working in harmony to provide comfort to strangers. The meal they served was modest: vegetables from their garden, olives preserved in brine, eggs, and a small amount of wine mixed with water in the Greek fashion. Baucis and Philemon apologized repeatedly for the simplicity of the fare, but they served it with such grace, such evident desire to provide comfort, that the meal became a feast not of abundance, but of generosity. They gave not from their excess, but from their need, which is the truest form of charity. As the evening progressed, a miracle began to manifest that only the divine visitors initially recognized. The wine bowl, which had been nearly empty, kept replenishing itself. No matter how many times Philemon poured from it, offering refreshment to their guests, the level never diminished. The old couple began to notice this impossible occurrence, and understanding dawned upon them with a mixture of awe and trepidation. These were no ordinary travelers. Zeus and Hermes revealed their true forms, filling the humble cottage with divine radiance. Baucis and Philemon fell to their knees, terrified that they had unwittingly offended the gods by offering such simple hospitality to divine beings who deserved so much more. But Zeus raised them gently, speaking words of reassurance. They had not offended the gods. They had honored them in the way that mattered most. While the wealthy villagers had turned away divine visitors, this humble couple had exemplified the virtue that the gods valued above all others: genuine hospitality, kindness without expectation of reward, generosity that gives from the heart rather than from surplus. Then Zeus spoke of justice and consequence. The village that had turned away travelers, that had forgotten the sacred duty of hospitality, would be destroyed. But Baucis and Philemon would be saved and rewarded. Zeus instructed the elderly couple to climb with him and Hermes to the top of the nearby mountain, warning them not to look back until they reached the summit, echoing the conditions set in other myths where mortals are tested by their ability to obey divine instructions without fully understanding the reasons. The climb was difficult for the old couple, their aged limbs protesting the steep ascent. But they persevered, supported by the gods, driven by trust, and perhaps by a growing awareness that something momentous was occurring. Only when they reached the peak did Zeus give them permission to turn and look upon the valley below. Where the village had stood, there was now a vast lake, its waters covering every house that had denied hospitality, every door that had closed against strangers in need. The divine flood had come not as random destruction, but as measured justice. Those who had closed their hearts to others found their world swept away. Yet standing alone, miraculously untouched by the rising waters, was the humble cottage of Baucis and Philemon, transformed now into something magnificent, a temple with golden roof and marble columns, standing as a beacon of virtue beside the lake of judgment. Zeus turned to the elderly couple and offered them a choice. They could ask for any reward, any blessing within divine power to grant. The old couple conferred quietly, whispering together as they had done for decades, and when they spoke, their request was perfectly suited to their nature. They asked not for wealth or power, not for youth restored or years extended. Instead, they made two simple requests. First, that they might serve as priest and priestess of this new temple, tending to it and continuing to offer hospitality to travelers in the god's name. Second, and most touchingly, that when death came for them, it might come for both simultaneously, so that neither would have to endure life without the other. Zeus granted both wishes with a warmth that suggested even the king of gods was moved by such devotion. And so Baucis and Philemon lived out their extended years as guardians of the temple, welcoming travelers with the same gracious hospitality they had shown to disguised gods, serving as living reminders that virtue resides not in wealth, but in character, not in grand gestures, but in simple kindness. The years passed gently for them, bringing contentment rather than infirmity. Then came the day appointed for their transformation. As they stood together in front of the temple, having completed their duties for what would be the final time, they began to speak to one another of their life together, of their gratitude for the years they had shared. As they spoke, a strange sensation overcame them. Their feet were growing roots, extending into the earth. Their skin was becoming bark, rough and protective. Their arms were elongating into branches, their fingers subdividing into twigs. In those final moments of transformation, as they looked upon one another and saw the change overtaking them both, they managed to speak final words of love before their mouths sealed shut and their faces became the textured surface of tree trunks. Side by side, their branches intertwining, Baucis and Philemon became two trees standing before the temple, a linden and an oak. Their roots entangled beneath the earth, their branches embracing above, eternally together as they had wished, transformed into living symbols of enduring love and unwavering devotion. Travelers who passed the temple in the years and centuries that followed would tell of these two remarkable trees, how their branches seemed to reach toward one another with intention, how leaves from one would fall and rest upon the other's roots, how they stood through storm and season, decline and renewal, always together. Local people would hang wreaths upon their branches and leave offerings at their roots, honoring not just the gods who had shown mercy, but the humble couple whose simple virtue had earned divine blessing. The story of Baucis and Philemon offers something rare in Greek mythology, an entirely positive transformation, a reward without catch or hidden curse, a recognition that goodness deserves blessing rather than punishment. So many myths end in tragedy, in transformation as penalty, in mortals paying terrible prices for their interactions with the divine. But here we find something different. Love rewarded, kindness recognized, simple virtue elevated to eternal symbol. This myth speaks profoundly to the Greek value system, revealing what truly mattered to ancient culture beneath all the tales of heroes and monsters. Hospitality, xenia, as the Greeks called it, was not merely polite behavior, but sacred duty. To turn away a stranger was to risk turning away a god in disguise. But more fundamentally, it was to fail at a basic human obligation. The wealthy villagers who closed their doors possessed everything materially, but nothing morally. Baucis and Philemon possessed almost nothing materially, but everything that truly mattered. There is deep comfort in this tale, especially when encountered in quiet moments before sleep. It suggests that the universe, or the gods, or the moral order of existence, whatever framework one chooses, ultimately recognizes and rewards genuine goodness. It promises that love, particularly the kind of steady, unglamorous, day-to-day love that Baucis and Philemon embodied, has power beyond the moment, meaning beyond the temporal, Their transformation into trees, rather than, say, stars or immortals, carries its own significance. Trees are rooted, stable, enduring. They provide shelter and shade to others, continue to give even after individual existence has been transmuted into something else. As trees, Baucis and Philemon continue their role as givers of hospitality, offerers of comfort, symbols of the virtues they practiced in life. In our modern context, removed from the immediate belief in Olympian gods who wander in disguise, the myth still resonates with surprising power. How do we treat strangers? Do we extend kindness without calculation of return? Are we capable of the kind of selfless generosity that gives from necessity rather than abundance? And perhaps most movingly, do we build the kind of love that Baucis and Philemon shared? A partnership so profound that the thought of existing without the other becomes unbearable. As we let this gentle myth settle into our thoughts like leaves falling softly upon still water, we might imagine those two intertwined trees still standing somewhere in the realm of story, their branches moving in eternal communion, their roots drawing sustenance from the same earth, their existence a quiet testament to the truth that love, kindness, and devotion possess a permanence that transcends individual mortality. The Trojan War produced countless tales of valor, sacrifice, and tragedy, yet few are as psychologically complex and emotionally devastating as the story of Ajax the Great, the towering warrior whose strength was surpassed only by Achilles himself. This is a myth about wounded pride, mental anguish, and the terrible price of honor denied. A story that reminds us how thin the line between glory and ruin can be, how quickly a hero can fall when recognition he believes he deserves is given to another. Ajax, son of Telamon, prince of Salamis, cousin to Achilles, was one of the indispensable warriors of the Greek forces at Troy. Ancient sources consistently describe him as a massive figure, both in physical stature and combat prowess, a warrior who stood like a tower amidst the chaos of battle. While Achilles was faster, more brilliant in his martial skills, Ajax represented something different: steadiness, reliability, endurance. He was the bulwark, the defensive fortress whom other Greeks could rely upon when battle turned desperate. Throughout the 10 years of the Trojan conflict, Ajax distinguished himself repeatedly. When Hector, Troy's greatest champion, challenged any Greek to single combat, it was Ajax who stepped forward to face him. When the Trojans nearly succeeded in burning the Greek ships, which would have trapped the invading force in enemy territory, it was Ajax who held the line, fighting desperately to prevent disaster. He was there for the recovery of fallen comrades, for the defensive stands that saved the army, for the grinding, unglamorous work of war that receives less glory than brilliant individual feats, but matters just as much for ultimate victory. He was particularly close to Achilles, his younger cousin, the semi-divine warrior whose rage and withdrawal drove so much of the Iliad's plot. When Achilles sulked in his tent, refusing to fight because of his quarrel with Agamemnon, it was Ajax who continued to anchor the Greek defense. When Patroclus fell wearing Achilles' armor, both Ajax and Odysseus fought desperately to recover the body and the famous armor, preventing the Trojans from desecrating the corpse and claiming the magnificent panoply as spoils. Then came the death of Achilles himself, struck down by an arrow guided by Apollo to his vulnerable heel. The loss of their greatest warrior devastated Greek morale. But, amidst the grief, a question arose that would determine Ajax's fate. Who deserved to inherit Achilles' divine armor, the magnificent panoply forged by Hephaestus himself, armor so remarkable that it was described in loving detail in the Iliad, representing not just protection, but status, legacy, the visible symbol of being the foremost warrior of the age. Ajax believed the answer was obvious. By tradition, by martial prowess, by the simple fact that aside from Achilles himself, he had been the greatest fighter in the Greek forces, the armor should pass to him. It was his by right, by accomplishment, by years of service. More than that, it was recognition that he deserved, acknowledgement of his worth, his sacrifices, his decade of standing steadfast, while more celebrated heroes came and went. But the Greek commanders decided differently. Rather than simply awarding the armor based on combat prowess, they held a debate, asking Ajax and his competitor, Odysseus, to argue their respective cases. Here Ajax faced a contest type fundamentally unsuited to his strengths. He was a warrior, not an orator. His gifts lay in action, not eloquence. Odysseus, conversely, was famously silver-tongued, the man of many wiles, the clever strategist whose greatest weapon was his mind and voice. The arguments were made. Ajax spoke of his accomplishments in battle, his countless moments of valor, his physical strength and martial skill. These were facts, undeniable and concrete. Odysseus spoke of strategy, of his clever schemes that had advanced the Greek cause, of the importance of intelligence in warfare, of his own significant contributions. He spoke beautifully, persuasively, weaving his argument with the skill that would later get him home to Ithaca through 10 years of wandering. When the vote came, the Greek commanders awarded Achilles' armor to Odysseus. The psychological impact of this decision on Ajax cannot be overstated. This was not merely disappointment at losing a prize, however valuable. This was a fundamental rejection of his identity, his worth, his decade of sacrifice. The decision suggested that cleverness mattered more than strength, that words outweighed deeds, that his particular kind of heroism, steadfast, reliable, physically dominant, was less valuable than Odysseus's cunning. For a man whose entire sense of self rested upon his martial prowess and his honor as a warrior, this judgment was not just unjust, but existentially devastating. That night, as Ajax sat alone in his tent, rage and grief overwhelmed him. The goddess Athena, who favored Odysseus, saw the dangerous fury building in Ajax's heart and decided to protect her favorite by afflicting his rival with madness. She clouded Ajax's mind, twisting his perception, transforming his desire for vengeance into delusional violence directed at the wrong targets. In his maddened state, Ajax believed he saw before him those he held responsible for his humiliation: Odysseus, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and the other Greek leaders who had denied him his rightful due. He attacked with the full fury of his tremendous strength, determined to make them pay for their injustice, to extract vengeance for the insult to his honor. He struck and slashed, spending hours in an orgy of violence, his rage so complete that it seemed nothing could sate it. But when dawn came and Athena lifted her curse, Ajax discovered the horrifying truth. The figures he had attacked were not his fellow Greeks, but animals, sheep, and cattle from the army's food supply. The blood covering him belonged not to his enemies, but to livestock. The great Ajax, terror of the Trojan army, bulwark of the Greek forces, had spent the night engaged in the slaughter of defenseless animals while believing he was exacting righteous revenge. The psychological horror of this realization is at the heart of the myth's tragedy. Ajax had not merely been denied honor, He had been reduced to a state of utter humiliation, made to look ridiculous, transformed from respected warrior to object of mockery. Everywhere he looked, he would see the evidence of his shameful action. Everyone would know that the great Ajax had lost his mind, had attacked sheep thinking they were men. The laughter would follow him forever, an unbearable counterpoint to the respect he had commanded for so long. But perhaps even worse than public humiliation was Ajax's private recognition of what had been done to him. His mind, his reason, his very perception of reality had been manipulated by the gods, specifically by Athena acting to protect Odysseus. He had been made a fool, a puppet, a plaything of divine whim. His strength, his skill, his years of heroism, none of it had protected him from being reduced to this pathetic state. The injustice of losing the armor paled beside the deeper injustice of being so thoroughly robbed of agency and dignity. Ajax, faced with this unbearable reality, made his choice. He could not live with such shame. His honor, already wounded by being passed over for Achilles' armor, could not survive this additional blow. In the clear-eyed understanding that came after madness lifted, he saw that his life as a respected warrior was over. Mockery would replace respect. Pity, or worse, contempt, would replace admiration. He found a quiet place, away from the camp. He fixed his sword in the ground, point upward, the very sword that had been a gift from Hector during their duel, when they had fought to a draw and exchanged tokens of respect. There is bitter irony in this detail. Ajax would die by a weapon given to him by his greatest honorable enemy, while his dishonor came from his own supposed allies. Ajax fell upon the sword, choosing death over dishonor, ending his own life rather than living with the unbearable weight of shame and humiliation. It was a warrior's death, self-inflicted, but meeting his end by the blade, as so many warriors did. His last thoughts, recorded in later tragic retellings, were of his father Telamon, of his homeland Salamis, of his failure to bring honor to his house and his name. The aftermath of Ajax's death revealed the continuing complexity of his story. Initially, Agamemnon and Menelaus, still angry at his attempt to kill the Greek leaders, even though it was divinely induced madness, argued that Ajax should not receive proper burial rites. This would have been the final insult, to die by one's own hand and then be denied the funeral honors that ensured peaceful passage to the afterlife. Only through the intervention of Odysseus, ironically, was Ajax granted proper burial. Odysseus argued that despite their rivalry, Ajax had been a great warrior who deserved honor in death. Yet even in the underworld, Ajax's wounded pride persisted. In the Odyssey, when Odysseus journeys to the realm of the dead and encounters Ajax's shade, he tries to speak to him, to make peace, to explain, and perhaps apologize. But Ajax's ghost turns away in silence, refusing to acknowledge Odysseus, maintaining his anger and sense of injustice even beyond the grave. It is one of the most haunting moments in Homer, the suggestion that some wounds cut so deep that even death cannot heal them. The myth of Ajax resonates across centuries because it speaks to fundamental aspects of human psychology and social experience. It explores what happens when someone who has dedicated themselves to excellence in one domain, physical prowess, steadfast reliability, finds that domain devalued in favor of qualities they do not possess. It examines the devastating impact of public humiliation on someone whose identity is built upon respect and honor. It reveals how quickly a hero can fall when the recognition he believes he has earned is denied. The story also raises uncomfortable questions about justice and merit. Did Ajax deserve the armor? By one measure, pure martial prowess, certainly. But was there more to consider? Odysseus's contributions to the Greek victory were real, even if different in kind from Ajax's. The commanders made a choice, and while Ajax experienced it as unjust, was it simply different values being prioritized? The myth does not provide easy answers, which is part of its enduring power. There is also the disturbing role of divine intervention. Athena's decision to drive Ajax mad prevented him from actually killing the Greek leaders, but it did so at the cost of his sanity and ultimately his life. The gods in Greek mythology frequently manipulate mortals, but this instance is particularly cruel. Ajax is punished for an action he might have taken, reduced to madness and humiliation, essentially driven to suicide by divine interference. What kind of justice is this? What kind of cosmic order permits such treatment of a loyal servant who fought for 10 years in a war initiated by divine manipulation of mortal hearts? Ajax's story serves as a dark counterpoint to the glory traditionally associated with the Trojan War. While the Iliad and Odyssey end with versions of triumph or homecoming, Ajax's tale reminds us of the psychological casualties of prolonged conflict, the warriors who survive the fighting only to be destroyed by what comes after, the men whose sense of honor and identity becomes so rigid that they cannot survive challenges to it. In quiet reflection, we might see in Ajax a warning about building one's entire identity upon a single quality or achievement, about the brittleness of pride, about the danger of needing external validation so completely that its denial becomes unbearable. Yet we might also see a tragic figure who deserved better, whose legitimate grievances were compounded by divine cruelty, who made the only choice that seemed available to him within his understanding of honor and shame. As we move from this dark tale toward lighter stories ahead, we carry with us Ajax's shade, still turning away in the underworld, still refusing reconciliation, a permanent monument to the truth that some wounds, some injustices, some humiliations cut so deeply that they define us beyond life itself. Of all the lost or lesser-known myths of ancient Greece, few combine romance, adventure, psychological depth, and theological significance quite like the tale of Psyche, the mortal woman whose beauty rivaled Aphrodite's, whose curiosity nearly destroyed her, and whose perseverance ultimately earned her a place among the immortals. Though the most complete version of this myth comes to us through the Roman writer Apuleius in his work The Golden Ass, its themes and structure are thoroughly Greek, exploring the relationship between human and divine, the transformative power of love, and the trials necessary for transcendence. Psyche's story begins, as so many Greek tales do, with extraordinary beauty that attracts both admiration and dangerous attention. She was the youngest and most beautiful of 3 daughters born to a king and queen, whose kingdom we might imagine nestled somewhere in the Greek world. Her beauty was not merely remarkable, but divine in quality, so stunning that people began to worship her as they would a goddess, neglecting the temples and altars of Aphrodite herself to gaze upon and praise this mortal woman. This should have been Psyche's triumph, but in the world of Greek mythology, beauty that attracts too much attention becomes a curse. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, was not pleased to find herself supplanted in human affections by a mere mortal. The goddess, whose vanity would later trigger the Trojan War through the judgment of Paris, could not tolerate such competition. She determined that Psyche must be punished for having the audacity to be too beautiful, even though Psyche herself had done nothing to cultivate worship or claim divine status. Aphrodite summoned her son Eros, the god of love known to the Romans as Cupid, and commanded him to use his arrows to make Psyche fall desperately in love with the most worthless, vile creature imaginable, a punishment fitting for one who had inadvertently stolen divine honors. Eros, dutiful son that he usually was, flew off to complete this task. But when he beheld Psyche for himself, something unprecedented occurred. Whether he accidentally pricked himself with his own arrow, or whether her beauty alone was sufficient, Eros fell instantly and completely in love with the mortal woman he had been sent to curse. Unable to fulfill his mother's command, but unable to openly defy her, Eros devised a complex solution. He arranged for an oracle to tell Psyche's father that his daughter must be taken to a mountaintop and left there to be claimed by a terrifying serpent husband whom even the gods feared. It was a command that seemed like punishment, but was actually rescue. The grieving parents, believing they had no choice but to obey divine will, took Psyche to the appointed place, dressed as if for a funeral rather than a wedding, and abandoned her to her supposed fate. But instead of a monster, Psyche found herself gently carried by Zephyrus, the west wind, to a magnificent palace hidden in a secret location. This palace was beyond anything she had imagined. Halls of precious materials, gardens of exquisite beauty, rooms filled with every comfort and luxury. Invisible servants attended to her every need, bringing food and drink, preparing baths, providing entertainment. It was paradise, but a paradise with one absolute condition. She must never attempt to see the face of the husband who visited her each night in darkness. Her mysterious husband, Eros, in his divine form, but concealed from her sight, treated her with tenderness and love, speaking with her for hours, making love to her in the protective darkness, creating a relationship based on voice and touch rather than sight. He explained that she must trust him, that disaster would follow if she ever tried to look upon him. Psyche agreed, and for a time she was happy in this strange existence, loved completely, but loving someone she could not see, surrounded by wealth and comfort, but isolated from everyone she had known. Yet doubt began to erode paradise. When Psyche's sisters came to visit, brought by Zephyrus at her request, because even luxury cannot entirely replace family, they were consumed by jealousy at her palace and mysterious situation. They planted seeds of suspicion, suggesting that her husband must indeed be the monster the oracle had predicted, that he hid his appearance because it was too horrible to reveal, that he was fattening her up to eventually devour her. The psychological torture of these suggestions, repeated and elaborated during multiple visits, gradually overwhelmed Psyche's trust. Finally, consumed by curiosity and fear, Psyche decided she must see the truth, regardless of the consequences. One night, after her husband had fallen asleep beside her, she prepared an oil, lamp, and a dagger, light to see by, and a weapon to defend herself if he proved to be a monster. With trembling hands, she lit the lamp and held it over the sleeping figure beside her. What she saw astonished her beyond measure. Instead of a serpent or monster, there lay the most beautiful being she had ever beheld, Eros himself, the god of love, his divine beauty surpassing even her own celebrated appearance. Wings of brilliant gold and white rose from his shoulders. His face, relaxed in sleep, displayed a perfection that took her breath away. Overcome with relief and love, Psyche leaned closer to kiss him. Disaster struck in that moment. A drop of hot oil from the lamp fell upon Eros's shoulder, burning him and waking him instantly. He saw what she had done, understood that trust had been broken, and knew that his mother would soon discover his disobedience. Without a word, his face showing both hurt and anger, he flew away, leaving Psyche alone in the magnificent palace that immediately began to fade, as if waking from a dream. Psyche found herself back in the ordinary world, abandoned, pregnant with Eros's child, and desperate to find the husband she had lost through her own lack of faith. She wandered from temple to temple, seeking any god who might help her, but none would risk Aphrodite's anger by offering aid. Finally, she realized she had no choice but to appeal directly to the goddess she had unknowingly offended, to present herself before Aphrodite and beg for mercy. Aphrodite, discovering at last that her son had betrayed her command and made love to the very mortal she had ordered him to curse, was furious. She had Psyche brought before her and subjected the pregnant mortal to cruel treatment, beatings and insults, and proclamations that a mere human could never be worthy of a god's love. But Aphrodite was also cunning enough to see an opportunity. She would set Psyche impossible tasks, ostensibly to prove the girl's worth, but actually to ensure her destruction. The first task seemed simple, but was actually impossible. Aphrodite presented Psyche with an enormous mixed pile of grains: wheat, barley, millet, poppy seeds, chickpeas, and lentils, and commanded that she separate them all into individual piles by morning. For a human working alone, the task was absurd. One might spend years on such sorting and never finish. Psyche sat before the massive pile in despair, understanding that this was not a test, but a death sentence disguised as a task. But Psyche, though abandoned by gods and goddess, found unexpected allies. Ants, tiny insects who spent their lives in endless organization and sorting, took pity on her. Thousands upon thousands of them emerged and began their work, each carrying individual grains to the appropriate pile. Through the night they labored, and when Aphrodite arrived in the morning expecting to find Psyche's failure, she instead found the task impossibly completed. The goddess's fury only increased. She set a second task. Psyche must gather golden fleece from the sun sheep that grazed by a nearby river. These were no ordinary animals, but magical creatures with tempers as fiery as their gleaming wool, rams that would kill anyone who approached them during their active daylight hours. Again, the task was designed to ensure Psyche's death. If she approached the sheep, they would destroy her. But as Psyche sat by the river, preparing to attempt this fatal task, a green reed growing from the bank whispered advice to her. "Wait until evening," the reed counseled, "when the sheep have calmed and returned to the far side of the river. Then gather the wool that has caught on brambles and thorns during their daytime wanderings." Psyche followed this advice, and when Aphrodite came expecting to hear of the girl's death, she instead found her holding an armful of golden fleece. The third task was darker still, requiring Psyche to descend to a place mortals should never go: the underworld itself. Aphrodite commanded her to take a box to Persephone, queen of the dead, and request that she fill it with a small portion of her beauty, which Aphrodite claimed to need after being worn out by caring for her wounded son. This task required Psyche not merely to risk death, but to actively seek out the realm of death, to descend while still living into the place where only shades should dwell. Psyche climbed a high tower, planning to throw herself from it, believing that death was the only way to reach the underworld, and that the task was simply another form of execution. But the tower itself spoke to her, providing detailed instructions. There was a living path to the underworld, a cave system that descended to the realm of Hades and Persephone. The tower told her what to bring: coins for Charon the ferryman, honey cakes for Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog, and, most importantly, what to avoid. She must not give in to pity for suffering souls who would beg her assistance, must not sit at Persephone's table, must not, under any circumstances, open the box Persephone would give her. Psyche followed these instructions precisely, making the terrifying journey into darkness, paying the ferryman, placating the monstrous dog, approaching the throne of the underworld's queen. Persephone, perhaps touched by this mortal's bravery, or perhaps simply pleased to cooperate in a relatively harmless divine scheme, filled the box with the requested gift and sent Psyche back to the surface world. But curiosity, which had caused Psyche's initial fall from paradise, proved her weakness once more. As she emerged into daylight, holding the sealed box that supposedly contained divine beauty, Psyche thought to herself that if she just took a tiny bit of this divine beauty for herself, perhaps Eros would love her more when they were finally reunited. Surely the goddess wouldn't miss such a small amount. And so, despite all the warnings, despite knowing the consequences of curiosity, Psyche opened the box. But the box contained no beauty. Instead, what Persephone had placed inside was the sleep of death itself, a supernatural slumber from which mortals could not wake. The moment Psyche opened the lid, this deadly sleep escaped and overcame her. She fell where she stood, collapsing into a state that resembled death more than natural sleep, her body still and lifeless, the opened box lying beside her. Meanwhile, Eros had recovered from his wound and had been watching over Psyche from afar, unable to bear being separated from her any longer. When he saw her fallen body, he rushed to her side, wiping the sleep from her face and carefully placing it back into the box where it belonged. He lifted her gently, and as consciousness returned to her, he explained that they would face his mother together. But first, he needed divine intervention of the highest order. Eros flew to Olympus and presented himself before Zeus, king of the gods, and pleaded his case. He spoke of his genuine love for Psyche, of her bravery in facing impossible trials, of her journey to the underworld itself to prove her devotion. He begged Zeus to legitimize their union, to make it possible for a god and mortal to be together without violating the cosmic order. Zeus, moved by the young god's sincerity and impressed by Psyche's perseverance through trials that would have destroyed most mortals, agreed to help. Zeus called an assembly of all the gods on Mount Olympus. There, before the divine council, he proclaimed that Psyche had earned the right to join the immortals. He gave her ambrosia, the food of the gods, and as she drank, her mortal nature transformed. She became immortal, a goddess in her own right, no longer subject to death, no longer separated from Eros by the unbridgeable gap between divine and human. Her very name, Psyche, which meant soul in Greek, took on new significance. she represented the human soul's capacity for transcendence, for rising above mortal limitations through love and perseverance. Aphrodite, faced with Zeus's decree and seeing that her son's love was genuine and that Psyche had proven herself through suffering, finally yielded her opposition. She accepted Psyche as her daughter-in-law, and the wedding of Eros and Psyche was celebrated with all the splendor that Olympus could provide. Gods and goddesses attended, offering gifts and blessings. Apollo played his lyre, the muses sang, and the marriage that had begun in darkness and secrecy was now celebrated in light and joy. In time, Psyche gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Voluptas, meaning pleasure, a fitting child for the union of love and soul. The family lived together on Olympus, and Psyche took her place among the immortals, the only mortal to have earned godhood through trials of love rather than heroic deeds in battle. The myth of Psyche resonates across millennia because it speaks to fundamental human experiences and aspirations. At its heart, it is a story about trust and its violation, about the consequences of curiosity, and about whether love can survive betrayal. Psyche's first major error, looking upon Eros when forbidden to do so, represents the human tendency to need proof, to trust our eyes more than our hearts, to demand visible evidence rather than accepting faith. Yet the myth is also deeply hopeful. Unlike many Greek tales where mistakes lead to permanent tragedy, Psyche is given the opportunity to redeem herself, to prove through actions that her love is genuine, even if her trust was imperfect. The trials she endures test different aspects of her character: patience and humility in the sorting task, wisdom in listening to advice with the golden fleece, courage in descending to the underworld. Each trial transforms her, building the strength and wisdom necessary to bridge the gap between mortal and divine. The relationship between Psyche and Eros also offers a nuanced view of love. Their initial union is based on secrecy and incomplete knowledge. She loves without seeing, he loves without being seen. This proves unsustainable. Trust without truth is fragile. But through suffering and separation, through trials and persistence, they build something stronger, a love based on full knowledge, earned through struggle, made eternal through divine blessing. There is also profound symbolism in Psyche's name and nature. She represents the soul, and her journey from mortal to immortal mirrors the soul's journey toward enlightenment or salvation in various philosophical and religious traditions. The trials represent the soul's purification, the necessary suffering that transforms base material into something refined and eternal. Her union with Eros, love, suggests that the soul finds its completion and immortality through love. The role of Aphrodite is equally complex. She appears as antagonist, jealous and cruel, setting impossible tasks designed to destroy. Yet in some readings, her trials serve an essential purpose. They test whether Psyche truly deserves immortality, whether a mortal soul has the strength to join the divine realm. Without Aphrodite's opposition, Psyche would have remained in comfortable paradise, but also in ignorance and incompleteness. It is through suffering that she grows, through trials that she proves her worth, through opposition that she earns her transformation. The happy ending, rare in Greek mythology, offers profound comfort. It suggests that love, when genuine and persistent, can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It promises that the soul, through suffering and growth, can transcend its mortal limitations. It demonstrates that even divine opposition can be overcome when mortal determination combines with genuine devotion. As we let this beautiful myth settle into our consciousness, like gentle light filtering through ancient temple columns, we might reflect on our own relationships, our own struggles with trust and curiosity, our own journeys through trials towards something greater than ourselves. Psyche's story reminds us that love worth having is love worth fighting for. That transformation requires struggle, and that the soul's journey toward its highest expression may be difficult, but is ultimately possible. In the ancient world, there lived a youth whose name has become synonymous with vanity and self-absorption, yet whose story, when told completely, reveals tragedy as much as foolishness. Narcissus was beautiful beyond measure, so lovely that both men and women, mortals and nymphs, fell desperately in love with him from the moment they laid eyes upon him. Yet he had no love to give in return. His heart remained untouched by all who desired him, as if some wall separated him from the capacity to truly see and value another being. Among those who loved Narcissus was the nymph Echo, whose own story is intertwined with his in a tale of cursed communication and unfulfilled longing. Echo had once been a bright, talkative nymph who served in the retinue of Hera, queen of the gods. But Echo made a fatal error. She used her gift for conversation to distract Hera with long, entertaining stories, while Zeus, Hera's husband, conducted his numerous affairs with other nymphs. When Hera discovered this deception, her punishment was fitting and cruel. Echo would never again be able to speak her own thoughts. She could only repeat the last words spoken by others, her voice stolen, her capacity for original expression destroyed. Cursed to mere repetition, Echo wandered the forests and mountains, her beautiful voice now capable only of mimicry. Then one day she saw Narcissus hunting in the woods, and love struck her heart with overwhelming force. She began to follow him, desperate to speak to him, to express her love, but incapable of initiating any conversation. She could only wait and hope that he might speak words she could repeat in a way that conveyed her feelings. Narcissus, sensing he was being followed, called out into the forest, asking who was there. Echo, hidden among the trees, could only repeat his words, "Who was there?" Confused and intrigued, Narcissus called out, "Come to me," and Echo joyfully repeated, "Come to me," taking this as an invitation. She emerged from her hiding place and rushed toward him with open arms, ready to embrace the youth she loved. But Narcissus recoiled from her touch with disgust and anger. He rejected her harshly, declaring that he would rather die than let her have him. The cruel words struck Echo like physical blows. She could only repeat "rather die," her own cursed voice speaking the rejection back to herself. Humiliated and heartbroken, Echo fled into the deepest parts of the forest, her love unreturned, her suffering complete. From that moment, Echo began to waste away. She stopped eating, stopped caring for herself, consumed entirely by grief and unrequited love. Her body slowly vanished, dissolving into nothing until only her voice remained, echoing endlessly in caves and canyons, repeating the words of others for eternity. A disembodied voice, forever denied the ability to speak its own truth, forever repeating but never initiating, forever responding but never being heard. Narcissus continued his life, rejecting every advance, breaking every heart that turned toward him. Among the gods, some began to take notice of this pattern of cruelty. One rejected lover, whether mortal or minor deity, the stories vary, prayed to Nemesis, the goddess of retribution and righteous anger, asking that Narcissus be punished for his heartlessness, that he might know what it felt like to love without hope of return. Nemesis heard this prayer and decided it was just. She would teach Narcissus about unrequited love by having him experience it himself. One day, as Narcissus was hunting in the forest, exhausted and thirsty from the chase, he came upon a still pool of water. The pool was perfect, undisturbed by wind or falling leaves, its surface like polished glass, reflecting the world above with absolute clarity. Narcissus knelt beside the pool to drink, and as he lowered his face toward the water, he saw reflected there the most beautiful face he had ever beheld. The image was stunning, perfect features framed by dark hair, eyes that seemed to hold depths of emotion, lips that begged to be kissed. For the first time in his life, Narcissus felt love, immediate, overwhelming, all-consuming love. He had finally encountered beauty that matched his own standards, that stirred his cold heart into feeling. He did not realize, could not comprehend in that first moment, that he was looking at his own reflection. He believed he had discovered another being, a water spirit perhaps, dwelling in the pool. He reached toward the beautiful face to caress it, and the face in the water reached back. But the moment his fingers touched the surface, the image shattered into ripples. Narcissus pulled back his hand in distress, waiting desperately for the water to still so he could see his beloved again. When the surface calmed and the beautiful face reappeared, Narcissus tried to kiss it, lowering his lips toward the water. Again the image broke apart, disturbed by his approach. He tried to embrace the figure in the pool, but his arms found only cold water. No matter what he did, he could not touch, could not hold, could not possess the object of his love. Slowly, terribly, understanding began to dawn. Through repeated attempts and failures, through the perfect mimicry of his every movement, Narcissus finally realized the truth. The beautiful youth in the pool was himself. He was in love with his own reflection. The recognition brought not relief, but deeper anguish, for how could this love ever be fulfilled? He could see but not touch, could admire but never possess, could love but never be united with the object of his affection. Narcissus found himself trapped in a cruel paradox. To look away from the pool meant losing sight of his beloved, which was unbearable. But to gaze upon the reflection meant constantly desiring what he could never have, which was equally unbearable. He could not leave, could not accept, could not resolve the impossible situation. He was caught in a hell of his own making, sentenced by Nemesis to experience the very torture he had inflicted on others, love without possibility of return or fulfillment. Days passed with Narcissus kneeling by the pool, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to tear himself away from the image in the water. He spoke to the reflection, begging it to emerge from the pool, to take solid form, to return his love. The reflection mouthed the same words back at him, but remained forever unreachable. He wept, and his tears fell into the pool, disturbing the image, causing him fresh anguish each time the beautiful face disappeared. Echo, still wandering the forest as a disembodied voice, heard his lamentations. Despite the cruelty he had shown her, her love had not died with her body. When he cried out in anguish, she repeated his words, her echo creating a haunting chorus of grief. When he said, "Alas, her voice answered alas from the surrounding trees and rocks. They were together in their suffering, both trapped in impossible love, but Narcissus never acknowledged her presence, never understood that his anguish was being shared and reflected by the nymph he had rejected. As days turned to weeks, Narcissus began to waste away just as Echo had. His beautiful body, once so admired, grew thin and pale. His flesh dissolved, consumed by the impossible passion that burned within him. The gods, watching this tragedy unfold, took pity on him in death as they had not in life. They transformed his fading body into a flower, the narcissus flower that grows near water, its white petals surrounding a yellow center, forever bending toward its reflection in pools and streams, forever seeking what it cannot have. The myth of Narcissus and Echo operates on multiple levels, offering insights into human psychology, divine justice, and the nature of love and communication. On the surface, it serves as a warning against vanity and self-absorption, suggesting that those who cannot see beyond their own beauty, who reject all others as unworthy, will ultimately be trapped in sterile self-love that leads to destruction rather than fulfillment. But the story is more complex than a simple moral tale. Narcissus's inability to love others might be understood as a deeper psychological wound, an incapacity for genuine connection that makes him as much victim as villain. His final fate, falling in love with himself, represents the ultimate isolation. He is literally the only being he can love, and even that love cannot be consummated because it is directed at an image rather than a reality. Echo's tragedy adds another dimension to the myth. Her curse to only repeat the words of others represents a profound loss of selfhood and agency. She cannot express her own thoughts, feelings, or desires. She can only reflect back what she hears, much as Narcissus can only love what he sees reflected. In this sense, they are mirror images of each other, both trapped in reflection, both unable to truly communicate or connect, both consumed by love that cannot find expression or fulfillment. The punishment of both characters, orchestrated by Hera for Echo and Nemesis for Narcissus, demonstrates the Greek concept of divine justice. Both are made to suffer in ways that directly relate to their transgressions. Echo loses her voice because she misused it to deceive. Narcissus learns unrequited love because he inflicted it on others. Yet there is a tragic quality to these punishments. They seem to exceed the crimes, destroying both characters completely rather than teaching them and allowing redemption. The transformation of Narcissus into a flower offers a peculiar form of immortality. He becomes eternally fixed in the moment of his obsession, forever gazing at his reflection in the water. The flower that bears his name continues his story, beautiful but solitary, admired but unable to return affection, trapped in its nature as Narcissus was trapped in his. The myth also speaks to the relationship between image and reality, appearance and substance. Narcissus falls in love with an image, a reflection that has no substance, no reality beyond its visual appearance. This speaks to the dangers of valuing surface over depth, of being seduced by appearances rather than seeking genuine connection with real beings who can love in return. In modern times, the term narcissism has come to describe a personality type characterized by excessive self-love, vanity, and inability to empathize with others. The psychological concept draws directly from this ancient myth, recognizing in Narcissus's story a pattern of behavior that still manifests in human relationships. the person so absorbed in their own reflection, literal or metaphorical, that they cannot truly see or value others. Echo's story, less often discussed in modern contexts, deserves equal attention. Her loss of voice, her reduction to mere repetition, speaks to the experience of those who are silenced, who lose their ability to express their authentic selves, who can only reflect back what others say rather than speaking their own truth. Her continuing existence as a disembodied voice, forever repeating but never originating, represents a kind of living death, presence without agency, sound without meaning. Together, these two tragic figures create a meditation on failed communication and impossible love. Narcissus cannot love an other because he can only see himself. Echo cannot express herself because she can only repeat others. They orbit each other in mutual incomprehension, each trapped in their own curse, each destroyed by their inability to truly connect. As this sorrowful myth fades into the gentle darkness of contemplation, we carry forward the image of that still pool, the beautiful youth kneeling beside it, the disembodied voice echoing his grief from the surrounding forest, and the white flower that grows where he fell, still bending toward its reflection, still seeking what can never be found. Long before the familiar gods of Olympus established their reign, long before Zeus and his siblings divided the cosmos among themselves, there occurred a war that shook the very foundations of existence. This was the Gigantomachy, the war between the Olympian gods and the giants, a cosmic struggle that determined the future order of the universe, yet has been largely overshadowed in popular understanding by more famous conflicts like the Titanomachy that preceded it. The giants were born from Gaia, the earth itself, in an act of vengeance and grief. When the Titans, the previous generation of divine beings, were defeated by Zeus and the Olympians and cast down into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, Gaia mourned her children. The blood of Uranos, the sky god, had fallen upon her when he was castrated by his son Kronos, and from this blood the giants were born, making them both children of earth and sky, beings of tremendous power designed specifically to challenge the new order that had imprisoned their predecessors. These giants were not like the Aloidae or other monstrous beings of myth. They were divine in nature, born with strength that rivaled the gods, some with additional terrifying features, legs that ended in serpents rather than feet, bodies covered in impenetrable scales, the ability to hurl entire mountains as weapons. They were, in essence, the Earth's answer to Olympus, a force created specifically to overthrow Zeus and restore the old order or establish something entirely new. The war began when the giants, at Gaia's urging, rose up against the Olympian gods. They advanced toward Mount Olympus with terrifying determination, ripping mountains from their roots to use as projectiles and siege equipment, their serpent legs propelling them forward with unnatural speed, their voices shaking the earth with battle cries that echoed across creation. The gods watched their approach with growing concern, for an oracle had pronounced that the giants could not be killed by gods alone. Mortal aid would be necessary for victory. This oracle created a crucial complication. The gods, proud and powerful, accustomed to supreme authority, needed mortal assistance to defend their realm. Zeus understood this and took action, recruiting the greatest mortal hero of the age, Heracles, whose strength and courage were legendary even then, to fight alongside the divine forces. Some versions of the myth suggest that other mortal heroes joined as well, But Heracles was essential, the bridge between mortal and immortal that made victory possible. The battle itself was cosmic in scale. Individual combats between gods and giants shaped the landscape and determined the fate of the world. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, weapons forged by the Cyclopes that could shatter mountains and burn with the heat of stars. Poseidon broke off pieces of islands and threw them at his opponents, trapping giants beneath massive rocks that would later become part of the Mediterranean landscape. Athena demonstrated both martial prowess and strategic brilliance, fighting with spear and shield while coordinating the divine forces. Apollo and Artemis, the twin archers, shot arrows guided by divine accuracy, each shaft finding vulnerable spots in even the most heavily armored giants. Hephaestus, the smith god, hurled molten metal from his forges, burning and blinding his opponents. Dionysus, often underestimated as merely the god of wine and celebration, proved formidable in battle, using his thyrsus, a staff wrapped in ivy and topped with a pine cone, as a devastating weapon, and leading wild forces of nature against the giants. Hera, often remembered more for her jealousy than her power, fought with fierce determination, her pride in the Olympian order driving her to defend it with every divine power at her command. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, turned the earth's gifts against earth's children, using agricultural tools and natural forces as weapons. Even gentle Hestia, goddess of the hearth, contributed her powers to the defense of Olympus, though her role was more supportive than aggressive. Heracles proved crucial in combat after combat. The gods would wound a giant, driving it back, bringing it to the brink of defeat, but could not deliver the killing blow. Then Heracles would step forward with his mortal strength, his club, or his poison arrows dipped in the blood of the Hydra, and strike the finishing blow that ended the giant's life. It was a dance of immortal power and mortal determination, each depending on the other for victory. Among the many individual combats, certain duels became legendary. Athena pursued the giant Enceladus across the sea until she ripped the island of Sicily from the mainland and hurled it upon him, trapping him beneath its mass, where he supposedly remains, his breath creating the eruptions of Mount Etna. The goddess Hecate used her torches, associated with her role as goddess of magic and crossroads, to burn the giant Clytios. Hephaestus defeated Mimas by pouring molten iron upon him, essentially using his forge as a weapon of war. Poseidon pursued the giant polybotes across the sea, finally breaking off a piece of the island of Kos and crushing him beneath it, creating a new island in the process. Hermes, wearing the cap of invisibility borrowed from Hades, struck down the giant Hippolytos. Artemis killed Gratian with her arrows, while Apollo shot down Ephialtes, a different Ephialtes from the Aleuade, but equally formidable in size and strength. The Fates, those ancient goddesses who determined destiny itself, entered the battle-wielding bronze clubs, using the implements of death itself as weapons to strike down giants who had no fate to protect them from such endings. Even the normally aloof fates recognized that the outcome of this war would determine cosmic order for ages to come and threw their weight behind the Olympians. The battle raged across the earth, transforming landscapes, creating new geographical features, splitting islands, and raising mountains. The very ground shook with the impact of fallen giants and hurled boulders. The sky darkened with volcanic ash and the smoke of divine fire. The seas churned with the bodies of combatants and the displaced waters of Poseidon's wrath. Gaia, seeing her children falling one by one despite their tremendous power, grew desperate. She sought a magical herb that would make the giants completely invulnerable to all harm, divine and mortal alike. But Zeus, learning of this plan, acted swiftly. He commanded the sun god Helios not to rise, the moon goddess Selene not to shine, and the dawn goddess Eos not to bring morning. In this imposed darkness, Zeus himself searched the earth and found the magical herb, destroying it before Gaia could use it to save her children. Without this final protection, the giants fell one after another. The combined might of gods and Heracles proved too much for them, despite their size, strength, and determination. The war that had threatened to overthrow the Olympian order ended in decisive victory for Zeus and his allies. The fallen giants were buried beneath mountains and islands, their writhing supposedly causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions for generations afterward. The aftermath of the Gigantomachy established the Olympian gods as the unchallenged rulers of the cosmos. They had defended their realm against the most serious threat to their authority, proving their right to rule not just through victory over the Titans, but through defense against the Earth's own champions. The war demonstrated that the Olympian order, while challenged, possessed the strength, strategy, and determination to maintain itself against all opposition. But the Gigantomachy also revealed the limitations of divine power. The gods needed mortal help to achieve victory, an acknowledgement that immortals alone could not determine all outcomes, that mortal courage and strength had essential roles to play in cosmic events. This interdependence between divine and mortal would become a recurring theme in Greek mythology, appearing in countless heroic tales where gods and mortals worked together to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. The war also represented a transition in cosmic order. The defeat of the giants meant that Gaia's direct influence over the ruling powers diminished. The earth itself remained eternal and powerful, but its ability to determine who ruled the heavens and held supreme authority was curtailed. The younger generation, the Olympians, had proven their right to rule not through inheritance or coup, but through defending their position against legitimate challengers. For mortals who heard this tale, the Gigantomachy offered several lessons. It demonstrated that even the greatest powers face challenges to their authority and must fight to maintain their positions. It showed that cooperation between different types of beings, gods and mortals, immortals and heroes, could achieve what neither could alone. It explained natural phenomena like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes as the continuing struggles of trapped giants rather than random events without meaning. The relative obscurity of the Gigantomachy, compared to other mythological events, is itself intriguing. The Titanomachy, the earlier war between Titans and Olympians, features more prominently in popular retellings, as do individual hero stories and specific divine scandals. Yet the Gigantomachy was equally important in establishing cosmic order, perhaps even more so because it represented external threat rather than internal family conflict. Some scholars suggest that the Gigantomachy myth reflects historical memories of ancient earthquakes and volcanic activity, natural disasters that terrified early peoples who interpreted them as ongoing battles between earth and sky, chthonic and celestial forces. The image of giants trapped beneath mountains, still struggling, still causing the earth to shake, provided an explanation for phenomena that otherwise seemed random and incomprehensible. The myth also speaks to generational conflict and the challenge of maintaining power. Just as the Olympians overthrew the Titans, they must defend against the giants sent by the previous generation. Each ruling power faces challenges from those who preceded them, from forces that represent older claims to authority. Yet the cycle stops here. The giants are the last serious threat to Olympian rule, suggesting that some orders, once sufficiently established and defended, achieve a stability that previous ones lacked. In the quiet darkness of reflection, we might contemplate this ancient war that shaped the cosmos, this battle that determined the order of existence for all subsequent ages. The image of giants with serpent legs advancing on divine Olympus, of Heracles standing beside Zeus, of islands torn from the earth and hurled as weapons, of the ground itself shaking with cosmic combat. These images speak to fundamental human experiences of conflict, defense, cooperation, and the establishment of order from chaos. The Gigantomachy reminds us that every established order, however secure it seems, was once challenged and had to prove its right to exist through struggle and victory. It suggests that legitimacy comes not just from claiming power, but from defending it against serious opposition. And it demonstrates that even gods need help sometimes, that interdependence rather than absolute independence characterizes the relationship between different levels of existence, between immortal and mortal, divine and human, heaven and earth. Among the countless heroes who sailed to Troy and fought in that decade-long conflict, the sons of Theseus remain curiously overlooked despite their noble lineage and significant actions during the war. Acamas and Demophon, born to the great Athenian hero and his wife Phaedra, should by rights feature prominently in tales of the Trojan War, yet their stories have been largely overshadowed by more celebrated warriors. This is perhaps fitting for sons of Theseus, for their father's legacy itself became complicated and problematic in ways that may have dimmed interest in his descendants. Acamas and Demophon were raised in Athens during their father's turbulent later years. Theseus, once celebrated as Athens' greatest hero, the man who killed the Minotaur and united Attica, had fallen from favor through a series of poor decisions and calamitous adventures. By the time his sons reached young manhood, their father had been exiled from Athens, dying alone and unmourned on a foreign island while his city moved forward without him. The sons inherited a complicated legacy, noble blood, heroic ancestry, but also the taint of their father's fall from grace. When the call went out across Greece for warriors to join Agamemnon's expedition against Troy, to reclaim Helen and punish Paris for his offense against hospitality, Acamas and Demophon were among those who answered. They came representing Athens, bringing Athenian ships and soldiers to join the massive fleet assembling at Aulis. Some sources suggest they hoped to restore honor to their father's name through their own martial accomplishments, to prove that Theseus's bloodline still produced heroes worthy of respect. The brothers fought together throughout the long years at Troy, distinguished for their bravery, if not their innovation or strategic brilliance. They were solid, reliable warriors, much like Ajax in temperament, if not in size, the kind of men who held the line during defensive stands and performed their duties without seeking individual glory. Ancient sources mention them fighting in various engagements, participating in councils of war, contributing to the Greek effort in steady, unglamorous ways. But their most significant action during the Trojan War was not a matter of combat, but of family rescue, a mission that revealed both their filial devotion and the complex web of relationships that existed between the Greek and Trojan worlds before war divided them. This story begins years before the war, during one of Theseus's most infamous exploits. Theseus and his friend Pirithous, king of the Lapiths, had both decided in their middle age that they deserved to marry daughters of Zeus. Theseus chose Helen, daughter of Zeus and Leda, even though she was at the time only a young girl, far too young for marriage. They abducted her from Sparta and brought her to Athens, where Theseus left her in the care of his mother Aethra, while he went off on another adventure with Pirithous. This adventure, an attempt to abduct Persephone from the underworld itself, resulted in both heroes being trapped in Hades for years. During Theseus's absence, Helen's brothers, Castor and Polydeuces, the Dioscuri, came to rescue their sister. They invaded Attica, conquered Athens, and recovered Helen. But they also took revenge for her abduction by enslaving Aethra, Theseus's mother, and taking her back to Sparta as Helen's servant. When Helen later married Menelaus and became queen of Sparta, Aethra remained with her as a slave, a constant reminder of her son's crime. Years later, when Paris abducted Helen and took her to Troy, Aethra was taken along as part of Helen's household. Thus, the grandmother of Acamas and Demophon found herself in Troy, an elderly woman serving the woman whose abduction by her son had led to her own enslavement, all of them now caught up in a war sparked by Helen's second abduction. The brothers learned of their grandmother's presence in Troy and determined to rescue her. This required careful planning, for Aethra was held within the city, beyond the reach of direct assault. Some versions of the myth suggest that Acamas undertook a secret mission into Troy before the war formally began, entering the city as an envoy and making contact with Aethra, perhaps even developing a romantic relationship with Laodice, one of Priam's daughters, though this detail varies among sources. The opportunity for rescue came with the wooden horse. When the Greeks constructed the famous horse as a stratagem to enter Troy, Acamas and Demophon were among the select warriors chosen to hide inside it. This was both an honor, being trusted with such a crucial mission, and an opportunity, for they would be among the first Greeks inside Troy when the trap was sprung. When night fell and the Greeks emerged from the horse to open the city gates for their companions, amidst the chaos and slaughter that followed, Acamas and Demophon fought their way through the burning city with a specific purpose. They sought out Helen's quarters, where they knew their grandmother served. Ancient sources describe their reunion: two young warriors and an elderly woman who had not seen her grandsons since they were children, meeting amidst the destruction of Troy. They claimed Aethra and brought her under their protection. When Helen herself was recovered by Menelaus, when the question arose of what to do with her slaves and attendants, the brothers demanded that their grandmother be freed and returned to them. Helen, whether from genuine remorse for the suffering her abductions had caused or from political necessity, agreed. Some versions suggest she even helped persuade Menelaus to allow Aethra's release, acknowledging that the old woman had been enslaved unjustly and deserved to return home with her grandsons. Thus, while other Greeks fought for glory or treasure, while heroes claimed slaves and spoils from the burning city, Acamas and Demophon accomplished something more personally meaningful. They rescued their grandmother from years of enslavement and restored her freedom and dignity. It was not a deed that would be celebrated in epic poetry, not a dragon slain or a god challenged, but an act of filial devotion that honored both Aethra and the memory of their troubled father. The brothers survived the war and the difficult journey home. Unlike Agamemnon, murdered upon his return, or Odysseus, wandering for 10 years, or Ajax, driven to suicide, or Diomedes, exiled from his homeland. Acamas and Demophon made it back to Athens with Aethra. They found their city recovered from the troubles of their father's last years, ready to honor them as heroes who had fought at Troy and brought glory to Athens. Their later lives are less well documented than their Trojan adventure. Some sources suggest they helped govern Athens in the transitional period before the city developed its democratic institutions. Others mention marriages and children, the continuation of their noble line. They faded from prominence gradually, as most heroes do when the great wars and adventures of their youth give way to the quieter business of governance and family. The relative obscurity of Acamas and Demophon in mythological tradition is intriguing. They were sons of one of Greece's greatest heroes, participants in the most famous war in mythology, yet their stories remain fragmentary and understated. Perhaps this reflects the complicated legacy of Theseus himself, a hero whose early exploits were magnificent, but whose later years were marred by poor judgment and calamity. Perhaps it reflects the nature of their accomplishments: steady reliability rather than brilliant flash, rescue rather than conquest, family duty rather than personal glory. Or perhaps their obscurity speaks to a deeper truth about heroism and recognition. Not all who fight in great wars achieve fame. Not all who perform honorable deeds are celebrated in song. Achaean and Demophon represent the countless solid, reliable individuals who contribute to great events without becoming their stars, who perform their duties without seeking spotlight, who value family obligations over personal glory. Their rescue of Aethra provides a touching counterpoint to the broader narrative of the Trojan War. While that conflict is often portrayed as a matter of honor, glory, and masculine pride, here we find a simpler, more human motivation: grandsons seeking to rescue their grandmother from slavery. While other heroes fought for treasures and beautiful captives, these brothers fought to restore an old woman's freedom. It is a less epic motivation, but perhaps a more genuinely noble one. The brothers also represent continuity and restoration. Their father Theseus had fallen from grace, had died in exile, had left a legacy complicated by his later mistakes. But his sons restored honor to his line through their own actions, proving that one generation's failures need not define the next, that children can redeem troubled inheritances through their own choices and deeds. In the gentle darkness of contemplation, we might reflect on these understated heroes, these sons who lived in their father's long shadow, yet carved out their own path of honor. We might consider the value of steady reliability over brilliant flash, of family loyalty over personal glory, of rescue over conquest. The story of Acamas and Demophon reminds us that not all heroism is loud and celebrated, that some of the most meaningful deeds occur away from the spotlight, and that bringing one's grandmother safely home can be as noble an accomplishment as slaying a monster or conquering a city. When Hades, lord of the underworld, emerged from his dark kingdom and saw Persephone gathering flowers in a meadow, when he decided to abduct her and make her his queen, one witness stood between him and his goal. This was Cyane, a water nymph whose name meant dark blue, like the deep clear pools in which she dwelt. Her story is brief, often relegated to a footnote in the larger tale of Persephone's abduction, yet it speaks profoundly to themes of witness, resistance, and the price of speaking truth to power. Cyane was a nymph of Sicily, one of many minor female divinities associated with springs, rivers, and pools. She had existed peacefully for centuries, caring for her waters, enjoying the natural beauty of her surroundings, playing with the other nymphs, and sometimes with Persephone herself, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. The nymphs and the young goddess shared friendships, those simple companionships that arise from spending time in the same beautiful places, enjoying the same gentle pleasures of existence. On the day Hades decided to act on his desire, Persephone was gathering flowers with these nymph companions in a meadow. The earth itself had conspired with Zeus and Hades to create a perfect trap, an extraordinarily beautiful narcissus flower that drew Persephone away from her friends. When she reached for this flower, the ground split open and Hades emerged in his black chariot drawn by immortal horses, intending to seize the girl and carry her to his underground realm before anyone could interfere. But as Hades drove his chariot toward the underworld, seeking the entrance that would take him back to his kingdom, he had to cross through Cyan's territory. The nymph saw what was happening, understood immediately that this was abduction, not courtship, that Persephone was being taken against her will, that a terrible crime was unfolding before her eyes. Cyan did something remarkable. Though she was a minor nymph facing one of the three great gods who ruled the cosmos, though Hades had every advantage of power and authority, though resisting would certainly bring consequences upon her, she stepped forward to stop him. She rose from her pool, taking physical form, placing herself in the path of the dark god's chariot. She spoke to Hades with respect, but also with firm moral clarity. This was wrong, she told him. He could not take Persephone this way, against her will, without her mother's consent. If he wanted to marry the girl, he should ask properly, should court her as befits a god, should seek Demeter's permission as custom and decency required. He should not resort to violence and abduction. The nymph, tiny in power compared to the god of death, attempted to be the voice of justice and proper conduct. Her words were eloquent and passionate. She argued that love should be based on consent, that marriage should be a matter of agreement, not force, that even gods should respect basic principles of right and wrong. She reminded Hades that Demeter would grieve for her lost daughter, that taking Persephone this way would cause immense suffering. She pleaded with him to reconsider, to choose a better path, to act with the honor befitting his divine status. Hades listened to her speech, but his decision was already made. He wanted Persephone. Zeus had given permission for the abduction, and the opinion of a minor water nymph was not going to deter him from his chosen course. When Cyan refused to move aside, when she persisted in blocking his path, Hades grew angry. He was lord of the underworld, ruler of the dead, one of the three brothers who divided the cosmos among themselves. He would not be lectured by a nymph, however eloquent her arguments. In his rage, Hades struck Cyan's pool with his scepter, the same rod of authority with which he ruled the countless dead. The blow opened a direct path to the underworld, creating a shortcut through which he could take Persephone home. But the strike also carried a curse, punishment for Cyan's resistance, for her audacity in questioning a god's actions. Cyan felt herself dissolving. Her physical form began to melt away, transforming into water. She tried to speak, to continue her protest, but her voice failed. Her limbs became liquid, her features dissolved, her consciousness scattered. Within moments, the nymph who had spoken so bravely was gone, transformed entirely into the pool she had once inhabited. Where a divine being had stood, there was now only water, dark blue and clear, beautiful but silent, flowing but unable to speak. Demeter, frantic when she discovered her daughter's disappearance, searched everywhere for Persephone. She questioned every being she encountered, asking if anyone had seen her daughter, if anyone knew what had happened. Eventually, her search brought her to Cyane's pool. The water nymph, now existing only as water, wanted desperately to tell Demeter the truth, to reveal that she had witnessed the abduction, to name Hades as the perpetrator. But she had no voice, no form, no way to communicate. In some versions of the myth, Cyane managed to offer one small piece of evidence. Persephone's belt or sash had fallen into the pool during the struggle, and this item floated to the surface when Demeter approached. The grieving mother recognized her daughter's possession and understood that Persephone had been in this place, that something significant had occurred here. It was not a full explanation, not the testimony Cyane wished to give, but it was something, a clue that helped Demeter eventually piece together the truth. The transformation of Cyane is one of mythology's quieter tragedies. She was punished not for wrongdoing, but for trying to prevent wrongdoing. She lost her voice, her form, her autonomy because she spoke truth to power, because she insisted that even gods should respect moral boundaries. Her fate demonstrates the cost of witness, the price of resistance, the danger of standing against those with superior force. Yet her story also offers a different kind of lesson. Though she failed to stop Hades, though she was silenced and transformed, Cyane at least tried. She did not stand aside and allow injustice to pass unchallenged. She used her voice while she had it, spoke her truth, even knowing the likely consequences. In a mythology full of characters who remain silent out of fear or complicity, Cyane's resistance stands out as an act of moral courage. The detail that Cyane and Persephone were friends adds poignancy to the tale. This was not an abstract matter of justice, but a personal one. Cyane saw her friend being abducted and could not stand by silently. Her resistance was motivated by specific care for a specific person, as well as by general principles of right and wrong. It makes her transformation even more tragic. She was silenced while trying to save someone she cared about. The myth also speaks to the theme of powerlessness and witness. Cyane saw the truth, understood what was happening, but lacked the power to change it. Her testimony, which could have helped Demeter find Persephone more quickly, was stolen from her through transformation. She became a silent witness, holding crucial knowledge, but unable to communicate it, exemplifying the frustration of those who see injustice but cannot speak against it. In later tradition, the Pool of Cyane became a sacred site, a place associated with the myth of Persephone's abduction. Travelers would visit it, leave offerings, remember the story. The water nymph who was silenced became a permanent part of the landscape and the tale, her sacrifice remembered even if her voice was lost. In this way, her witness endured beyond her transformation, the story of her resistance told and retold, ensuring that her attempt to stop Hades was not forgotten. The relationship between Cyane's story and the larger myth of Persephone is complex. The abduction of Persephone typically focuses on the grief of Demeter and the eventual compromise that allows Persephone to spend part of each year above ground, creating the seasons. It explains winter as the time when Demeter mourns her daughter's absence. But Cyane's story adds a dimension of resistance and cost, reminding us that the events that created the seasons also involved silencing those who tried to prevent them. Some interpretations see Cyane as representing the voice of feminine resistance to patriarchal violence. In a world where Zeus could give Persephone to Hades without consulting her or her mother, where a god could abduct a young goddess with impunity, Cyane stands as the one who says this is wrong, who insists on consent and proper conduct. Her silencing then becomes emblematic of how such voices are suppressed, how those who speak against powerful perpetrators are punished and rendered voiceless. In the quiet hours before sleep, we might reflect on Cyane's pool, dark blue and clear, holding within its waters the dissolved form of a nymph who dared to resist a god. We might consider the many voices throughout history that have been silenced for speaking truth, the witnesses punished for their testimony, the resistors transformed or destroyed for standing in the path of power. And we might honor Cyane's choice, her decision to speak, even knowing the cost, to resist even facing certain defeat, to be a voice for justice in a moment when such a voice was desperately needed. Her pool still flows somewhere in story, a testament to resistance and witness, to the cost of standing against injustice, and to the truth that some voices, though silenced, continue to speak through the tales that remember them. Among the many tragic stories that emerge from Greek mythology, few are as heartbreaking in their simplicity as the tale of King Aegeus and the Black Sails, a story of miscommunication, grief, and a father's unbearable loss. This is not a tale of divine punishment or monstrous opponents, but of human error, the kind of mistake that could happen to anyone, made catastrophic by circumstance and timing. Aegeus, king of Athens, had struggled for years with the curse of childlessness. He consulted oracles, performed sacrifices, desperately sought any means to obtain an heir. His journey to solve this problem eventually brought him to Troezen, where he spent time with King Pythias, and through a series of events involving prophecy and perhaps divine manipulation, fathered a child with Pythias's daughter, Aethra. This child was Theseus, who would grow to become Athens' greatest hero. But Aegeus could not openly claim the child, for he already had a wife in Athens, and the situation was politically complicated. Instead, he made an arrangement with Aethra. He placed his sword and sandals beneath a heavy rock and told her that when their son grew strong enough to lift the rock and claim these tokens, he should come to Athens and present them to Aegeus, who would then acknowledge him as heir. Years passed. Theseus grew strong and clever, eventually lifting the rock and traveling to Athens with his father's tokens. Aegeus, after nearly being tricked by his wife Medea into poisoning this strong young stranger, recognized the sword and sandals at the last moment and acknowledged Theseus as his son. The reunion was joyful, the succession secured, Athens blessed with a young hero of tremendous promise. But Athens labored under a terrible burden. Years earlier, Aegeus' son Androgeos, born to another woman before Theseus' conception, had traveled to Crete and been killed there, either murdered by jealous rivals or sent to fight a bull by the jealous King Minos. In response, Minos had demanded a terrible tribute. Every 9 years, Athens must send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete to be fed to the Minotaur, the monstrous half-man, half-bull creature that lived in the labyrinth beneath the palace of Knossos. Theseus, newly arrived in Athens and eager to prove his heroism, volunteered to be one of the tribute victims, promising his father that he would kill the Minotaur and end this terrible sacrifice forever. Aegeus tried to dissuade him, terrified at the thought of losing his newly discovered son, but Theseus insisted. Finally, Aegeus agreed, but made his son promise one thing: The ship that carried the tribute victims to Crete sailed with black sails, symbolizing mourning and death. If Theseus succeeded in killing the Minotaur and survived to return home, he must change the sails to white so that Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, would know from a distance that his son lived. Theseus agreed to this promise. He sailed to Crete with the other Athenian youths, entered the labyrinth, killed the Minotaur with the help of Ariadne, who gave him the thread that would guide him back out, and escaped with the tribute victims and Ariadne herself. The mission was a complete success. Athens was freed from its terrible obligation, the monster was dead, and Theseus had proven himself the hero his father had hoped for. But on the return journey, tragedy was already forming. Theseus stopped at the island of Naxos, where he abandoned Ariadne while she slept. Whether this was because the god Dionysus claimed her, because Theseus was simply callous, or because he was commanded by gods to leave her, the sources vary. But the abandonment troubled him, weighing on his mind and heart as the ship continued toward Athens. In his distraction, grief, or simply forgetfulness, Theseus failed to change the sails. The ship that had left Athens with black sails approached Athens with black sails still flying, signaling death and defeat rather than victory and survival. Aegeus had been waiting every day since his son's departure, watching the sea from a high cliff near Athens, scanning the horizon for any sign of the returning ship. When he finally saw the vessel approaching, his old eyes immediately sought the color of its sails. His heart, which had been carrying hope and fear in equal measure for weeks, recognized the black canvas before his mind could process what it meant. Black sails. His son was dead. The Minotaur had killed Theseus, the hero who had only recently come into his life, who had given him such joy and pride, who represented the future of Athens, was gone. The promise of seeing white sails would never be fulfilled. His lineage would end with him. All was lost. The grief that overwhelmed Aegeus in that moment was total and unbearable. He had lived so long without an heir, had finally discovered his son, had briefly known the joy of having a successor worthy of his throne, and now that hope was destroyed. The pain was more than he could endure. Without hesitation, without pausing to confirm what he thought he saw, without waiting for the ship to arrive and reveal the truth, Aegeus threw himself from the cliff into the sea below. The king's body disappeared into the waves, and that sea, which had brought his son to him and which he believed had taken his son from him, would forever after bear his name, the Aegean Sea, named for a father's grief and tragic misunderstanding. When Theseus's ship arrived in Athens, the hero was confused by the mourning that greeted him. He had expected celebration, welcoming crowds, joy at the defeat of the Minotaur and the end of the tribute. Instead, he found a city in grief, wailing, filling the streets. It took only moments to learn the terrible truth. His father had seen the black sails, and believing Theseus dead, had killed himself in despair. The realization of what his forgetfulness had caused must have been devastating. Theseus had succeeded in his mission, had defeated the monster, had saved the tribute victims, and freed Athens from Cretan tyranny. But in forgetting to change the sails, in that single small oversight, he had killed his father as surely as if he had pushed him from the cliff himself. The victory was forever tainted by this tragedy, the triumph shadowed by the cost. Theseus became king of Athens as his father had intended, but he ruled under the weight of this guilt. The Aegean Sea, which bore his father's name, was a constant reminder of his failure, his forgetfulness, the terrible consequence of a moment's inattention. Every time he saw those waters, he must have remembered the black sails he forgot to change, the white sails he had promised to raise, and the father who died believing his son had been killed. The story of Aegeus and the black sails resonates across centuries because it speaks to universal human experiences of miscommunication, tragic timing, and how small oversights can have catastrophic consequences. It is not a story of divine punishment or moral failure, but of simple human error compounded by circumstance. Theseus did not intend to cause his father's death. Aegeus's suicide was based on a misunderstanding, not on reality, yet the outcome was just as final as if both had acted with malicious intent. The myth also explores themes of hope and despair, of how thin the line between them can be. Aegeus had lived with hope during his son's absence, maintaining faith that Theseus would succeed, that the white sails would appear on the horizon. But when he saw black sails, hope instantly converted to total despair, so complete that death seemed preferable to living with the loss. There was no middle ground, no pause to verify, no moment of doubt or investigation. Black sails meant death, and death of hope was unbearable. For Theseus, the tragedy represented the cost of distraction and forgetfulness. He had survived the labyrinth, defeated the Minotaur, escaped Crete, navigated back to Athens, but in his preoccupation with other matters, specifically his treatment of Ariadne, he forgot the one simple task that would have saved his father's life. It is a reminder that sometimes the most crucial actions are the simplest ones, and that what seems like a minor detail can carry enormous weight. The naming of the Aegean Sea preserves the tragedy in permanent form. Every mention of those waters recalls the story, ensuring that Aegeus's grief and Theseus's error are not forgotten. Geography itself becomes memorial, the sea a vast gravestone marking where a father fell believing his son was dead. Some interpretations see the myth as commenting on the relationship between generations, particularly between fathers and sons. Aegeus's life had centered on obtaining an heir, and once he found Theseus, his entire existence became wrapped up in his son's fate. He could not imagine continuing without him, could not bear the thought of losing what he had waited so long to find. His suicide, then, represents the devastating dependence that can develop between parent and child, the danger of investing one's entire sense of purpose and meaning in another person's existence. For those hearing this story in ancient Athens, it explained a geographical feature, the name of the sea that was crucial to their maritime city, while also serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication, the weight of promises, and the terrible consequences when small details are overlooked. It reminded Athenians that their greatest hero, Theseus, was not perfect, that even his glorious victory over the Minotaur was marred by a tragic error that cost his father's life. In the peaceful darkness of reflection, we might contemplate the image of Aegeus standing on that cliff, watching the horizon, his old eyes straining to see the color of approaching sails. We might imagine the moment when he recognized black fabric against the sky, the instant when hope died and despair overwhelmed him. We might picture Theseus standing on the deck of his ship, distracted by thoughts of Ariadne or the adventure he had survived, forgetting the simple promise he had made. And we might consider how many tragedies in our own lives arise from similar small oversights, forgotten promises, miscommunications that compound into irreversible consequences. The Aegean Sea still bears witness to this ancient sorrow, its waters holding the memory of a father's grief and a son's tragic forgetfulness. A reminder that sometimes the greatest disasters arise not from malice or divine intervention, but from simple human error and the cruel timing that transforms oversight into tragedy. In the scattered fragments of Greek mythology, there exists a story of transformation that speaks to themes of protection, flight, and the divine rescue of those who face injustice. This is the tale of Hemithea, a princess who leaped into the sea to escape her father's rage and was transformed by a compassionate god into a protective deity. Her story is less known than other transformation myths, yet it carries its own profound message about escape, salvation, and second chances. Hemithea was born into the royal house of a Greek kingdom, the daughter of a king whose name and character varied in different versions of the tale. She grew up in privilege, but also in the complicated dynamics of palace life, where honor, reputation, and appearances mattered more than truth or compassion. As she reached young womanhood, an incident occurred that would transform her life forever and threaten to end it in violence. The details vary in different tellings, but the core of the story remains consistent. Hemithea was accused of sexual misconduct, of having lost her virginity before marriage, of having brought dishonor upon her royal house. Whether the accusation was true or false, whether she had been raped or had chosen her actions, whether she was entirely innocent and falsely accused, the sources differ. But the response of her father was universal across versions. He was enraged, consumed by shame and fury that his daughter had supposedly brought disgrace upon his name and lineage. In the patriarchal society of ancient Greece, a daughter's sexual conduct was seen as reflecting directly on her father's honor. Any suggestion of impropriety was not merely a personal matter, but a stain on the entire family, something that could affect political alliances, marriage prospects for other children, and the king's reputation among his peers. Whether his daughter was actually guilty, whether she had any choice in what occurred, mattered less than the perception of disgrace. The king's rage led him to a terrible decision. Hemithea must die. Some versions suggest he planned to execute her himself, others that he intended to expose her to elements or wild beasts, allowing nature to carry out the sentence. The death would be presented as punishment for her transgression, a way of restoring honor through blood, of demonstrating that the king valued his reputation more than his own child's life. Hemithea learned of her father's intention. The terror and despair she must have felt, knowing that her own father planned to kill her, that no one would intervene to save her, that she was condemned, regardless of her actual guilt or innocence, drove her to desperate action. Rather than wait passively for execution, rather than submit to the injustice of her sentence, she chose to take control of her own fate in the only way available to her. She fled to the coast, running until she reached high cliffs overlooking the sea. Behind her, she could perhaps hear pursuit, her father's men coming to carry out his orders. Before her lay only the drop to the waters below, deadly rocks and crashing waves. There was no escape, no third option, no path to safety. She was trapped between certain death at her father's hands and possible death in the sea. Hemithea made her choice. She leaped from the cliff, throwing herself into the air, plummeting toward the sea below. It was an act of desperation, but also of defiance, choosing her own death over the one her father had planned, taking agency even in her final moment, refusing to submit to his judgment. But as she fell through the air, divine intervention occurred. Apollo, the god of light, music, prophecy, and healing, saw her leap and was moved to compassion. Whether he had been watching her story unfold, whether he was present by chance, whether he was summoned by her desperate prayer, the sources vary. But the god acted quickly, his divine power reaching out to catch the falling princess before she struck the water. Apollo transformed Hemithea in midair, changing her mortal form into something divine. She did not die in the sea, but was reborn from it, emerging not as a princess fleeing her father's rage, but as a protective deity, a minor goddess or spirit with her own domain and powers. The transformation saved her life, but also elevated her existence, giving her purpose beyond merely surviving, granting her the ability to help others as she had been helped. In her new divine form, Hemithea became a protector of women and children, particularly those fleeing violence or persecution. She was invoked by women in childbirth, by mothers seeking to keep their children safe, by those escaping abusive homes or dangerous situations. Her own experience of fleeing her father's murderous rage made her particularly sympathetic to others in similar circumstances, and her divine powers allowed her to offer protection and intervention that had not been available to her in her mortal life. Some versions of the myth suggest that Hemithea established or was associated with a sanctuary, a place where women and children could seek refuge, knowing they would be protected from those who wished them harm. This sanctuary offered physical safety, but also spiritual comfort, the presence of a deity who understood suffering and flight, who had herself been transformed by the experience of choosing leap over submission. The transformation also represented a form of justice, or at least of cosmic correction. Hemithia's father had condemned her based on shame and reputation rather than truth or compassion. He had valued honor over his daughter's life, appearances over reality. But the gods, or at least Apollo, saw differently. By saving and transforming Hemithea, Apollo rendered judgment on the father's actions, suggesting that his rage was unjust, that his daughter deserved rescue, not execution, that divine law recognized a deeper morality than human honor codes. The myth of Hemithea joins a larger pattern in Greek mythology of transformation as salvation. Many transformation myths involve punishment, mortals changed into animals or plants as penalty for offending gods. But there exists another category of transformation, those that save rather than punish, that offer escape from impossible situations, that elevate mortal suffering into divine purpose. Hemithia's story belongs to this tradition, alongside figures like Daphne, who was transformed into a laurel tree to escape Apollo's pursuit, though in Hemithia's case, Apollo is rescuer rather than pursuer. The choice to leap from the cliff carries symbolic weight. It represents the moment when all conventional options have been exhausted, when remaining in the existing situation means certain destruction, when the only path forward requires a literal leap of faith. Hemithea could not know that Apollo would save her, could not be certain that her leap would result in anything but death. She jumped anyway, choosing uncertain fate over certain doom, acting rather than passively accepting her sentence. Her transformation into a protector of women and children creates a meaningful continuation of her story. She does not merely survive and disappear, but takes on a role directly related to her own experience. Having fled violence, she helps others flee violence. Having faced injustice from a father who should have protected her, she becomes the protective figure she herself needed. Her suffering is not wasted, but becomes the foundation for her divine purpose. For ancient Greek women hearing this story, Hemethea's myth offered both warning and hope. The warning was clear. Daughters were vulnerable to their father's rage, to accusations of sexual misconduct, to being valued less than family honor. The patriarchal system could be deadly, even for princesses. But the hope was equally present. The gods might intervene, transformation might save. There existed divine forces that recognized injustice and acted to correct it. When all human help failed, divine help might appear. The story also speaks to the theme of voice and agency. Hemethea, accused and condemned, apparently had no voice in defending herself, no ability to appeal her father's judgment, no court or advocate to plead her case. The only agency available to her was the choice of how to die. But by choosing to leap, by taking that action, she opened the possibility for transformation. Apollo's intervention required her leap, her willingness to act. Salvation came not while she passively waited for execution, but when she seized whatever agency remained to her. In the gentle quiet of contemplation, we might reflect on Hemethea's leap, that moment of decision when the princess threw herself from the cliff, not knowing if death or transformation awaited. We might consider how many people face similar moments, though usually metaphorical rather than literal, when staying means destruction and leaving requires a leap into uncertainty. We might honor the courage required to choose uncertain escape over certain doom, and we might draw hope from the possibility that sometimes, in our moments of greatest desperation, unexpected salvation appears. Hemethea's story, preserved in fragments, remains a testament to transformation born from crisis, to divine compassion responding to human suffering, to the protective deity who watches over those who flee violence, because she herself once made that desperate flight and found, instead of death in the sea, a new existence dedicated to helping others escape the fates from which she was saved. As our journey through the lost myths of ancient Greece draws toward its close, as these forgotten stories settle into our consciousness like ancient sediment forming layers of understanding, we return to the questions that opened our exploration. Why do certain myths endure in popular memory, while others fade into relative obscurity? And what value remains in these quieter tales that have been overshadowed by more celebrated narratives? The myths we have explored tonight share certain qualities that distinguish them from the thunderous epics that dominate popular understanding of Greek mythology. They tend toward the intimate rather than the epic, the psychological rather than the martial, the transformative rather than the triumphant. They are stories that invite contemplation rather than excitement, that speak to internal landscapes of emotion and choice, rather than external battlefields of conquest and glory. Consider the Aloidae, those ambitious giants who stacked mountains to reach heaven, whose hubris was so grand it almost becomes sympathetic, whose brotherhood was simultaneously their strength and their vulnerability. Their story speaks to the universal human drive to transcend limitations, to reach beyond our station, to reshape the world according to our vision. Yet it also warns of the dangers in such reaching, the consequences of challenging fundamental orders, the way competitive instincts among those closest to us can become our downfall. Or reflect on Baucis and Philemon, the elderly couple whose simple hospitality earned them transformation into intertwined trees, eternally together as they had wished. In a mythology filled with tragedy and punishment, their story offers the rare gift of purely positive transformation, reward without hidden curse, recognition that genuine kindness and enduring love possess value that transcends material wealth and social status. Their tale reminds us that the most profound virtues are often the simplest, that what truly matters may not be grand gestures, but small acts of generosity offered consistently over a lifetime. The tragedy of Ajax reveals how quickly glory can transform into despair, how wounded pride and public humiliation can destroy even the mightiest warrior, how the values we build our identities upon can become prisons when circumstances change. His story, dark and psychologically devastating, speaks to experiences of perceived injustice, of feeling undervalued, of the brittleness that develops when our entire sense of self rests upon external validation. It reminds us that even heroes have breaking points, that mental anguish can be as destructive as any physical wound. Psyche's journey from mortal to goddess demonstrates that transformation requires trials, that love worth having demands perseverance through difficulty, that curiosity, while potentially dangerous, is also fundamentally human and can be forgiven when followed by genuine effort toward redemption. Her story offers hope that the soul can transcend its limitations, that through struggle and persistence, we might achieve union with what we love, that even divine opposition can be overcome when determination combines with authentic devotion. The parallel tragedies of Narcissus and Echo show us the devastating consequences of self-absorption and the loss of voice, of loving only reflection, whether of self or of another's words, of the isolation that comes when genuine connection becomes impossible. Their transformations into flower and disembodied voice preserve their suffering in eternal form, reminding us that some wounds persist beyond individual existence, that the inability to truly see or speak to one another creates tragedies that echo across time. The Gigantomachy, that cosmic war that determined the order of existence, reveals that every established system once faced serious challenge and had to prove its right to exist through struggle. It demonstrates the necessity of cooperation between different types of being, the limitations of even divine power when operating alone, the way great conflicts reshape the very landscape of reality. It reminds us that legitimacy comes not just from claiming authority, but from successfully defending it against genuine opposition. Acamas and Demophon, those overlooked sons of a famous father, who rescued their grandmother from slavery while other heroes sought more glorious prizes, represent the countless individuals who contribute to great events without becoming their stars, who value family duty over personal fame, who perform honorable deeds in the shadow of more celebrated accomplishments. Their story honors the unglamorous heroism of steady reliability, the courage required to act rightly when recognition is unlikely. Cyane, the water nymph who dared to stand in the path of Hades, who spoke truth to power knowing the cost, who was silenced for trying to prevent injustice, embodies the price of witness and resistance. Her transformation into the pool she once inhabited, her inability to testify to Demeter despite possessing crucial knowledge, speaks to the experience of those who see truth but are prevented from speaking it, who are punished not for wrongdoing but for attempting to prevent it. Yet her story also celebrates the choice to resist even when defeat is certain, to use one's voice while one has it. Aegeus and the Black Sails offer a heartbreaking meditation on miscommunication, on how small oversights can compound into catastrophic consequences, on the thin line between hope and despair. The tragedy arose not from malice or divine punishment, but from simple human error and cruel timing, reminding us that some disasters require no grand explanation, that forgetfulness and circumstance can be as destructive as any curse. And Hemithea, the princess who leaped from the cliff to escape her father's rage and was transformed by Apollo into a protective deity, demonstrates that sometimes salvation comes in the moment of greatest desperation, that the leap into uncertainty can lead to transformation rather than destruction, that divine compassion may appear when human help fails. Her story offers hope to those fleeing violence, particularly women and children vulnerable to those who should protect them, suggesting that taking whatever agency remains available, even when options seem exhausted, may open possibilities for rescue and transformation. These myths, forgotten or overlooked, offer something the more famous tales sometimes lack: space for reflection, permission to feel complex emotions, recognition that heroism takes many forms, acknowledgement that transformation can be salvation or punishment, that justice is not always served, that love endures beyond death, that courage manifests in both grand gestures and quiet persistence. In our modern world, these ancient stories continue to speak with surprising relevance. We still build ambitious towers, hoping to reach impossible heights. We still face choices between hospitality and self-protection, between generosity and hoarding. We still struggle with wounded pride and the need for validation. We still seek love that transcends limitations. We still become trapped in self-absorption or lose our authentic voices. We still witness injustice and must decide whether to speak against it. We still suffer from miscommunications and small errors that compound into tragedy. We still sometimes need to leap into uncertainty, hoping for transformation. The Greeks understood that mythology served multiple purposes simultaneously. It explained natural phenomena like echoes and the Aegean Sea's name. It provided moral instruction through cautionary tales and positive examples. It explored psychological depths of human experience. It offered comfort and hope in the face of suffering. And it created shared cultural narratives that bound communities together through common stories and understanding. These lost myths have waited patiently through centuries, preserved in fragments, scattered references, occasional retellings by those who recognize their value. They have survived despite being overshadowed, despite receiving less attention than more dramatic tales. And they wait still, ready to offer their particular wisdom to anyone willing to listen, to slow down, to contemplate rather than merely consume. As the last echoes of these ancient stories fade into peaceful silence, as we return from the realm of forgotten myths to the ordinary world, we carry with us new understanding and old wisdom renewed. We have walked with giants who challenged heaven, with elderly lovers who chose to die together, with wounded warriors and persistent souls, with silent nymphs and grieving fathers, with rescued princesses and transformed youths. The night that holds us is the same night that held the ancient Greeks as they told these stories by firelight, passing them from generation to generation, shaping and reshaping them to speak to current concerns while preserving essential truths. We are connected across millennia by these narratives, by the recognition that human experiences of love and loss, ambition and failure, transformation and persistence remain fundamentally constant, even as the details of daily life change beyond recognition. May these lost myths, rediscovered in this quiet journey, settle gently into your thoughts. May the image of intertwined trees standing eternal vigil, of mountains stacked toward heaven, of pools that once were voices, of ships with forgotten sails, of cliffs from which princesses leaped toward transformation, accompany you into peaceful rest. May the knowledge that these stories survived centuries of neglect to speak again tonight offer comfort that what truly matters endures, that the forgotten can be remembered, that the quiet voices of overlooked tales carry wisdom worth hearing. The lost myths of ancient Greece have shared their secrets with us. The giants rest in their eternal punishment. The old couple stands as intertwined trees. Ajax's shade turns away in the underworld. Psyche has ascended to godhood. Narcissus gazes forever at his reflection. The Olympian order stands secure. Achaios and Demophon have brought their grandmother home. Cyane flows silent but remembered. The Aegean bears its sorrowful name, and Hemithea watches over those who flee violence, the protective goddess who once herself made that desperate leap. These stories, ancient and patient, have given us their gifts. Now, as the final words of this long night's telling fade into silence, as the myths return to their places in the vast library of human narrative, we too can rest, carrying their wisdom into sleep and beyond, knowing that the tales that truly matter never entirely fade, that the voices of the past continue to whisper truth across the centuries, and that sometimes the most profound stories are precisely those that time has gently, temporarily obscured.